Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Hey everyone, today I'm talking with Erik Steidl, author of Ayal the Arrow Boy, a middle grade novel that is a retelling of the story of David and Jonathan, originally found in the book of 1 Samuel in the Bible. Erik's unique twist tells the tale of this biblical accounting through the eyes of a young servant boy named Ayal, and it's really an intriguing narrative that will appeal to adults as well. But before we get started, here's the inside scoop on Erik Steidl. Erik Steidl was born and raised in Medina, Ohio, as the third of 6 children. He wrote his first book, titled A City Slicker in Texas, for a Power of the Pen competition in 4th grade and never looked back. He has always found joy in writing, both creatively and academically. He attended Liberty University, where he crammed a 4-year degree into 6 years, graduating in 2012 with a BS in teaching English as a second language and a minor in Spanish and youth ministry. Erik is married to his high school sweetheart, Shannon. They live together in Medina, Ohio, with their 4 children and yellow lab. They are an active family and enjoy hiking, soccer, basketball, biking, and almost any other outdoor activity. Erik is proud to be able to state that, like him, his children are all avid Star Wars fans. For more information about Erik Steidl and his works, visit his website at steidlstories.com. Well, hi Erik, welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your new novel, Ayal the Arrow Boy.
So Ayal the Arrow Boy is a creative retelling of one of the classical biblical accounts. It's the account of David and Jonathan. It's found in First Samuel 18, but it's told from the perspective of one of the minor characters in the story. Near the end of the story, I'm not going to give away the punchline or anything, but near the end of the story, Jonathan shoots an arrow to signal to David whether it is safe for David to remain in Israel or not. And he sends a servant boy to go fetch the arrow while David comes out hiding. And so then they say goodbye and David leaves. So it's a whole story of Saul, the king of Israel, and how he wanted to assassinate David, who was a commander in his army, but was Jonathan's best friend. And so it's really good intrigue. It's one of the best stories in the Bible, but it's told from that minor character's perspective, the boy who Jonathan sent to fetch the arrow.
So what inspired you to write this story?
So I got this idea for this story from really the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. My wife and I volunteer at our local church working with the middle school and high school students. And when everything shut down, we were kind of like, well, we're like, we can't meet in person anymore. Like, we weren't allowed. So how do we still engage our middle school students in scripture? And so I was like, well, what if we told, Bible stories from like teenagers' perspectives in the story? Because like all the stories in the Bible, for the most part, are told from adult perspectives, right? And so maybe it could be more engaging, more intriguing to them if we actually told the same stories, but from minor characters, teenagers' stories. And so like the whole premise of the story is, like I said, it's taking that story, that well-known story of David and Jonathan and like the assassination attempt on David, but retelling it from a character who's just mentioned once in the story.
Yeah, I love that, telling it from a minor character's perspective. And it seems like that is becoming more and more of a trend, but I think it brings a whole new light to the story, because who would have imagined the story being told from a servant boy's perspective?
Right, and I think that, the Bible is kind of, I think a lot of it is left open for things just like that. I think, I forget which gospel it's in, but at the end of it, the writer even says, and like, if we were to tell everything that Jesus did, like there wouldn't be, like, you could fill up the entire sky with scrolls and we wouldn't have enough room to write down everything that Jesus actually did. And so to me, that's like saying, like, there's a lot of untold stories. There's a lot of untold perspectives, at least in my point of view. Like, as long as we don't get outside the realm of actual biblical teaching and stuff like that, I think that the Bible was left open for us to do things like this.
So you wrote your book and it came out during the pandemic. And then what? Did you do like a Bible study with your students, or how are you using this book to reach kids?
Well, so what we did was I started writing it. I think it was probably like March or April during the pandemic. Like, everything shut down in March. And so I started writing it in April, and I started talking to one of the pastors at our church. And I was like, what if we started like a blog? A lot of churches are doing blogs. And so what if we started a blog and we just released this kind of chapter by chapter each week on the blog? And so our middle school students could just kind of like, whenever they wanted to, just connect with this and engage in scripture. And so, yeah, that's really how we used it throughout the pandemic. It's funny, like we started it primarily for middle school and high school students, but a lot of adults from the church actually were engaging in it, like almost more than the middle school students were, and just a lot of positive feedback on it and stuff like that. So. But as far as the Bible study, our church is just now getting back to meeting in person again. So we haven't really started up middle school Bible studies yet at my church. Our church just split into two campuses. And so we're at the new campus where we only have like 3 or 4 middle school students right now anyways. So we haven't really established that middle school Bible study again yet.
Yeah. Well, things are starting to open back up. Our church just opened up 2 Sundays ago, so it was nice to get back to some semblance of normal anyway.
Yeah, the problem though is like we've all been used to wearing masks, and so now like that we don't, like I have to remember, like I have a facial expression, like people are going to see what faces I'm making now, so I got to be careful,
Yeah, that's so true. Oh my goodness. So tell us about your main character. He is a character from the Bible. What motivates him to get involved in all this, or does he do so involuntarily?
Kind of both. So he's an errand boy in the palace, right? He works for Prince Jonathan, who is King Saul's son, and so he's a runner. That's what he is very good at, very talented at. But his whole life, he's an orphan, and so he grew up on the streets of Jerusalem. And he's always felt very insignificant. He's smaller in stature, he's skinny, but then he found out that he's a really good runner. He can run fast, he can run for long distances, right? And so he started running errands for the merchants in Jerusalem, and so then eventually that led to him getting a job at the palace with Jonathan. And so one day he's just running an errand, and he overhears 2 people talking about this plot to assassinate David, who, like I said, is Jonathan's best friend, also a commander in the Israelite army. And so it's kind of thrust upon him, but then he actually ends up playing a big part in thwarting that scheme, that assassination attempt. And so what motivates him is the drive for significance, right? And I think that's kind of something that drives us all, right? Like we don't want to just be another number. We want our lives to have meaning. We want to be part of things that are bigger than ourselves. And so the universal theme is that no matter how small we are in stature, or how insignificant we feel, that if we allow God to use us, then we can be part of something huge, like establishing David's kingdom in Israel, which is, known as the golden age of Israel. And so what drives him is just a need for significance. And one of the themes for Ayal is when Samuel went to anoint David king, he said, man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so that's kind of the underlying scripture that drives the book, is that, like, no matter how insignificant we feel, how insignificant we look, or how weak we look, if God's backing us, then we're more powerful than we can even imagine.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely themes still relatable to teens today, for sure. So, how long have you been writing, and what drew you to write for middle grade and teens?
So I've been writing for a while. It's funny because it was about maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I'm the third of six children, and so my mom, while we were growing up, she actually kept these like big Tupperware Rubbermaid boxes
Mm.
of just things from school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like 3 years ago, she's like, "Hey, Eric, here's this box of all this stuff that I collected while you were going through school." And so I'm looking through it,
Wow.
and in third grade, I wrote a story for a Power of the Pen competition.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I guess, is officially my debut publication. It did not win. It was a story called A City Slicker in Texas, where, like, I don't even remember my mindset with that. So officially, I've been writing since, like, third grade. As far as, like, actually writing, I probably started about 5 or 6 years ago. As the trade, I'm a teacher. I teach up in Cleveland. What I found was that a lot of the reading passages that my students had, they just didn't relate to very well. Just culturally, like the names in the passages weren't names that their names sounded like. And so it just wasn't very relatable to them.
Right.
Like a lot of them would be about things like building a treehouse. And I'm like, I don't think any of my students have ever actually even seen a treehouse. They don't, like,
Right.
they just can't engage with that reading passage. So I started writing short stories, doing things as simple as using my students' names in the story.
Mm.
And I found that they just engaged so much better with that. Like, they thought it was awesome. Oh my goodness. Like,
Yeah.
D'Anthony is in this story. It's his name. Okay. And so I started just writing these short stories. And then I ended up writing and self-publishing a children's book about 3 years ago, just kind of dealing with a lot of the obstacles that students in elementary school face. And so that was my debut publication. I just self-published that on Amazon. But then I was kind of just looking at, like, what should I write next? I have 7 different children's books in the works, like
Oh, wow.
at different stages of completion. I think every author is kind of there. We all have, like, 25 works in progress.
Yeah.
So there was that, and then I was like, you know what? Like, I think I'd like to write a novel. And then, like, the pandemic hit, and it kind of just fell into my lap. Hey, we still need to engage our middle school, high school students, and so why don't I try and take this desire I have to write a novel and try and engage students in scripture in a new way.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And I feel like the middle grade, there's a definite need for more books for that age group. I mean, it seems like that anyway. It's an audience that needs more attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, in the past 5-10 years, middle grade, teen, young adult literature has just boomed, right? Like, there was like Harry Potter, and that was kind of like an older middle grade type book, and that hit big. And then you had the Hunger Games, Divergent, all these novels for middle grade, and then kind of like the lower middle grade, like Diary of a Wimpy Kid type stuff. And it was just huge. And I was looking at it, I was like, you know what? There's not really a whole lot out there for middle grade specifically for the Christian market, right? So I was like, you know what? I could fill a need there. And so that was one of the driving things behind it. Yeah.
Nice. So what did you find to be the most challenging aspect of writing for a young audience?
So it's difficult as a 34-year-old to put myself back into the mindset of a 13, 14-year-old, young adult like that, because it's just a completely different way of thinking. I had to remember, like, well, what would I have done in this situation? And so I think, because if you write for teens but you write as an adult, it's just not going to come off as authentic. It's just not going to be very engaging. So one of the most challenging things that I found was trying to put myself into the mindset of a young teen boy, to write from that perspective.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I couldn't remember that far back, one. And two, I think you have to be around kids because it does take a certain, like you said, a totally different mindset. And I feel like, kids are just more open when looking at things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, what kind of feedback have you received on Ayal the Arrow Boy?
Just a lot of honestly very positive feedback. It's been just so encouraging. Everyone that has gotten back to me has absolutely loved it. They've said that their kids have loved it. I've also gotten there's like 6 or 7 grammatical errors though. So they're like, "Hey, Eric, I love the story." Like most people have said that it's very descriptive. They're like,
Uh-huh.
when I'm reading it to my kids, like it's just super descriptive. They have a very easy time like painting a picture in their head with it. So they're like, it's really descriptive. Love the story. However, there are some grammatical errors. You might just want to check out these. But overall, people like it's just been very encouraging.
So, these are students commenting on grammatical errors?
Mostly the parents.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well,
If the students commented, I would be happy with that. I'd be like,
I was
hey,
going
you
to
know
say,
what?
well,
We're
that's
doing a
pretty
job. There
impressive.
we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. So, what do you like to read? Do you have any favorite novels or series in the teen and young adult genres?
So I will always go back to J.R.R. Tolkien. Like I love The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings series. I think when Tolkien first wrote The Hobbit, he actually wrote it as like a children's book.
Hmm.
He never even planned on having it published. But I think it was actually C.S. Lewis read it and he was like, dude, you got to publish this, man.
Yeah.
And so then he published The Hobbit and it was such a big success that he went on to write, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and then he created like a whole world of like elves and dwarves, with the Silmarillion and all kinds of things. I just finished listening to the Harry Potter series.
Mm.
On my commute, I listened to books on tape, and so I listened through the Harry Potter series, and that was really good. J.K. Rowling, like when I know like it's just a really bad habit to like compare yourself to people. But as I'm like listening to J.K. Rowling, I'm like, wow, like my writing doesn't even hold a candle to this. Like it's so good.
But
But
that's where you
that's a
learn.
good middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And just like little nuances, like I could find a different way to describe, this. That's a more interesting way to engage like my readers' imaginations.
Mm.
But then in right now, I'm actually going through. It's called the Sigma Force series by James Rollins. It's not a teen series, but that's what I'm going through now,
Mm.
which is really good. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at in my own what I'm reading.
Nice. So, which writers have inspired your own work as an author?
I would probably go back to Tolkien.
Mm.
I did read through the Chronicles of Narnia as a kid. Really liked those, but I really just fell in love with The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Those are some of my favorite books of all time. So, yeah, I'll go with Tolkien there.
Yeah, well, you can't argue with that choice. So, what about your work? Do you have plans for maybe a middle grade Christian fiction series?
So I actually do. So I'm writing a 3-part trilogy based on the founding of the church at Philippi. There were 3 founding members of the church in Philippi, the Philippian church. There's a slave girl who she would pronounce divinations and stuff like that, that Paul cast a demon out of her. So she was the first convert to Christianity. Then there was Lydia. She was the seller of purple goods and purple linen, stuff like that. She was the second one. And the third one is the Philippian jailer.
Mm.
And so I'm writing a series based on the founding of the Philippian church, all those 3 conversions told from the perspective of their children. So the jailer's son is the first one I'm writing right now, because at the end it says that the jailer and his whole family believed and they were baptized. Again, it's one of those things where we know those people were there, so
Hmm.
let's take that character and expand it. Like, what did his family look like? Who were they? And so I created, a whole family for the jailer, and I'm telling the story of his conversion, the jailer's conversion, from his oldest son's perspective.
Now, you mentioned a couple of women. Will you write from the female perspective or from their children as well?
Yes, actually, so that's what I'm super nervous about. So with Lydia, I'm actually writing it from her daughter's perspective. So yes, I'm going to be writing from a teenage girl's perspective, uh, which, Lord help me. So we'll see. We'll see how that turns out. I'm probably going to be asking friends, family,
Yeah.
my wife about how would a 13-year-old girl think about this? I have no idea what I'm talking about here. But that's going to be one of the fun things about it. That's going to be one of the things that's going to help me grow as a writer, as an author, and hopefully that will engage an entirely different audience as well, as both my first two novels will be told from a young boy's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Well, more power to you, absolutely. So, and it sounds like fun, yeah. So, what about your students? What ages do you teach?
So through last year, I taught kindergarten through fifth grade. Like I said, I teach two things. I teach English as a second language, and I teach, it's called Title I reading. So it's reading intervention. And so I've been on the west side of Cleveland, where there's a very large Puerto Rican population. So I teach English to our students where English isn't necessarily their primary language,
Right.
or if they're bilingual, then my job is to, make sure that they're understanding everything in class, teach them, the English vocabulary and skills that they need to be successful academically. And then also the second part of the job is teaching reading intervention, working with students who are struggling academically in the area of literacy, and bringing them back on par.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've been K through 5. Next year I'm going to be expanding. I'll be doing K through 8, kindergarten through 8th grade. So I'll be working with those, teenagers
Yeah.
that I'm writing about. So it'll be a new perspective, and maybe I can, gain some perspective on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So now you have young children, is that right?
Yes, 4 kids. My oldest is going to turn 7 next month. Then I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old.
Wow. So they're a little young for your teen series yet, but have you read the story to them?
So my oldest one actually did read through Ayal. He's a really natural reader. He just picks up on it really quickly. He's read through the first 12 of the Magic Treehouse series. Which I also love. I would say actually, Mary Pope Osborne would be someone that I would definitely love to model my writing after.
Yeah.
She's really good. So yeah, he read through it. He really, really liked it. I'm not going to give away the ending, but he really loved this certain part at the ending. He's like, "Dad, that's awesome." I'm like, "Hey, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Glad you like it." But yeah, we read every night at bedtime. So maybe going through the novel, a couple pages each night before bed, wouldn't be a bad way to read it to the other 3.
Right. Yes. So you talked a bit about your middle grade books and briefly mentioned your children's books. Can you tell us about the children's book you have out now and maybe a couple of the works you have on the horizon?
Yeah, so my first children's book, it's called The First Ostrich to Fly. And so it's written kind of as it's an encouragement. It's a book of encouragement, because I feel like a lot of times with children, with students, we kind of place limitations on them, right? Especially with special needs students, or just in my situation, students of color, students that come from poverty, we place limitations on them. You're from Cleveland, and a lot of students from the inner city, they never leave the inner city, even though they could, right? And then students with autism, we're kind of okay, well, you'll be able to do this in life, but that's pretty much it. Or, Down syndrome, we just kind of put limitations on them. And so the book is about not placing limitations on ourselves and not allowing limitations to be placed on ourselves. the premise of the book is this boy, he has autism. It's not explicitly stated in the book, but he comes from school and he has a conversation with his grandma. And he's like, Grandma, I'm different from the other students. Why can't I do what they can do? And so instead of answering him, she tells him a story, and she's like, back when the world first began, ostriches could actually fly until someone told them that they couldn't fly. And then they just believed that they couldn't fly, and so they never flew again. They looked up into the sky and saw other birds flying, and they really wanted to, but they couldn't fly. That's what somebody said. And so they never tried to fly again. And so then there's other examples, like the lion really wanted to go swimming, but somebody told him, real lions don't swim. And so the lion just sits there and watches, the hippos and the elephants playing in the water. But, real lion, if you're a real lion, you don't swim, and so the boy's like, that's really sad. And so the grandma's like, oh, but there's more, somebody told the hyena that his laugh was like really annoying and he needs to stop. But the hyena just laughed louder. I like my laugh. And so, and then somebody told the moon, that like, why are you even shining right now? The sun is way brighter than you are. Why are you even bothering? But instead of listening to that, the moon just shone even brighter. And so it's kind of a story of encouragement with like, analogies to our own lives. And, whether like we're comparing ourselves to other lights like the moon, we can only shine as bright as we can shine. And however much light we give to the world, it's going to make the world a brighter place. And so that's what my children's book is about. Like I said, I've got about 7 or 8 in the works. I've got one called The Shark Tooth Fairy and Other Tough Animal Jobs. And so that's called a fanciful nonfiction. So it's like giving facts about animals, but in a fun way. So like what would it be like if there was a tooth fairy for sharks? Sharks lose as many as 35,000 teeth in a lifetime. So that would be a really tough job to have, Or what about a hairstylist for a porcupine? Because the porcupine quills are actually just hair. So that would be a really tough job. Or like a shoemaker for centipedes or, stuff like that. So a fun way to give facts about animals. So that's another one I've got in the works, and just a bunch of fun stuff like that.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. You have a lot of creativity, and you must be so busy.
It's a problem. So like what happens is like I'll be like laying in bed and I'll have this idea pop into my head, and it's like 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night. I'm like, I will not be able to sleep because I have this idea in my head, and once you have that in there, it's just spinning around, and I'm like, I either have to like write this idea down, or I have to convince myself that it's not a good idea anyways and just go to sleep,
Right.
So
oh my goodness.
It's a problem.
Well, there are worse problems.
Yeah.
So what do you like to do outside of writing?
So I'm really into running, actually. I ran track and cross country in high school, and then in college I got into running marathons. I did a couple triathlons. I even jumped into one college track meet unattached, and it's the only race I've ever not finished in my life. I jumped into the steeplechase, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's like hurdling.
Oh, okay.
But the hurdles don't fall over. It's like a big log. Basically, you jump over, and then on one of them you jump off of the hurdle and try and clear a water pit, which it's about as fun as it sounds. But so I was in this race with like some guys from Virginia Tech were in there, UNC Asheville, Liberty. There were some big time programs and big time runners in this race, and I just jumped in, and I was in dead last by about 50 meters after a mile and a quarter. And so we came to the back end of the track, and I literally just ran off the track, jumped this little chain link fence, and just ran out of the stadium. I was like, yeah, we're good here. But so I'm really into running, hiking, all that stuff. We enjoy baseball, soccer. My wife plays intramural soccer still. I play the piano. So I'm pretty involved in the worship department at our church. I play the keyboard there. So yeah, that's kind of our life. Family is really important to us.
Right.
We get together with my side of the family almost every Sunday for Sunday dinners. My dad actually, we all pitched in and we all helped build like an extension onto their house, an addition on the house, just so we could fit like
Oh,
enough
wow.
tables to fit our whole family in there. Because there's 12 grandkids now on my side of the family, and so family's really important. We get
Yeah.
together with family a lot. The pandemic was really tough on us that way,
Yeah.
when we couldn't get together as a family, and but now we're back getting together almost every Sunday, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's nice. Well, Erik, I am so glad you joined us today and shared a little bit about your work and what you have coming up. And congratulations on your recent release of Ayal the Arrow Boy.
All right, thank you very much, Sherry. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you.
Thank you for joining me today for my interview with Erik Steidl, author of Ayal the Arrow Boy. For more information on Erik and his works, visit his website at steidlstories.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews on InsideScoopLive.com.